Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Sloan the Record, recording on January 15th, releasing on January 19th, 2025. My name is Nathan Sloan, and joining me is my father, Ron. Each week, we're going on the record about family history, past and present. Along the way, we'll see if we can't learn more of the people, traditions, values, and stories that made us, all while opening a window for everyone else to see a little slice of life in rural North Carolina. New episodes are published every Sunday, and we appreciate every listener. You can make sure that you catch each episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Podbean. Just search for Sloan the Record. Hey, Dad, how are you doing?
Oh, doing well.
Having a good night? Just made a grocery run, you say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's always fun getting everything in from the car.
Cold night for a grocery run.
And I always try to get it all in on one trip. You know, both arms, I look like some kind of deformed condor coming up the steps.
I think that's every man's secret thing is we can't stand the idea of making two trips to get the groceries. So I actually went to the grocery store this morning, and in shame I had to leave some drinks behind and come back and get them in a second trip. Anyway, we are going to go ahead and get started, jump right into this topic, which is Margaret Excelle Sloan, Part 2. So just like for your dad, for your mom, we've split this up over 2 episodes. Just to recap some of the things that we talked about in the last episode. We talked about Grandma's childhood and family, some of her family members, siblings, and parents. I gave my impressions of her as a grandmother. And we both talked about her humor, and you kind of went into more detail on her skills athletically and creatively. So for this week, we're going to probably look into a little bit more of the later half of her life and people and see where that takes us. A big picture question, you may have to pause, take a beat, and think on this. But what would you say were her guiding principles in life?
Yeah, that's kind of a challenge. I'd say fairness as much as anything when it came to dealing with us as children. I mentioned she was a disciplinarian, the one that I feared the most. And, as I look back on it, she was fair, even though she was the strong arm of the law. She also, you hear the old thing about doctors, their first call is to do no harm. And I think she was a lot that way. She didn't talk about people. She didn't criticize people. And her mother didn't either, my grandmother. I never heard my grandmother criticize anybody or say anything bad about anybody, which sadly is unusual. But, Mom was, she enjoyed people, and she was kind to people. She did things for people that, like the neighborhood kids and all. I mentioned, I think, that they used to bring their toys to her if they broke them. And she would sit down there at the kitchen table with them and try to figure out a way to fix them and get them going again. But she also was a good communicator, if that ties into it. She would talk to you, take the time to talk about things. And, it's hard to bring advice to anybody or anything like that until you've communicated with them and gotten enough information to base advice on. And, that was one of the things that I saw in her. And that and her sense of humor drew a lot of people to her. I know even when she was in her 90s, she had women much younger than her that would come over to watch ball games with her. They'd have, a lot of people. She'd have, 5 or 6 over there with her to watch basketball games and to watch ACC tournament and things like that.
So would you say community then was important to her?
Yeah, community was. Her church was very important to her. The youth in the church were really important to her. She was involved with the youth programs up in her 70s and probably in her 80s, going to memory work tournaments and things. Can't tell you how many times she went to Hendersonville with the youth
What
program.
kind of tournament?
The memory work tournaments in our church and the sword drill. It was memory work was based on memorizing scripture and being able to have the people in the competitions call out the scripture by, like James 34:7, and you had to be able to quote it and do it by reference, by subject, or by completion. And she worked with the youth on that, helping them and working with them in learning it. And the sword drill as well. It's the first time I ever went to Caswell. Was one of the state competition was down at Caswell in Hatch Auditorium. And
that would have been when Hatch Auditorium had to have been like brand new then, in the 60s.
Yeah, probably so. And I that's the first thing I ever failed at. They got me on that one. I was just having such a good time down there. Everybody got, going at me about, you better get in there and study, you're going to fail, And finally I started believing them. I mean, I knew the stuff inside and out. And then got up there and I was waiting for my turn. My heart started pounding. I kept hearing them say, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to fail. And they said something like John 3:16, and I just stood there like a cat a deer in the headlights, and time. And then, of course, I knew the verse inside out. But Mom was real active in that, and just a lot of things in the church that she participated in.
Where do you think that came from? Did she have particularly religious parents?
Well, I know all of her family were strong believers, all of her brothers and sisters. Grandmother was in her 90s when I became really conscious of her, in my teen years. She would say her prayers every night. She was a strong Christian. She was very quiet, and like my mother, and like my dad, she didn't get in people's face with it. She did it more by example and the way she treated people. She was a lot of fun. People enjoyed being around her. She had one of those senses of humor. What is it, self-deprecating, they call it? Mm-hmm. Where she'd make herself the brunt of the joke a lot of times. And rather than ever targeting it at somebody else. I'd hear people, I think I said before, as I got older in adulthood and had kids and would be around some of her friends, and I'd say something offhand or something, and they'd laugh and say, well, we know where you got that. And they talk about Mom's sense of humor, and I'd say, well, I didn't know she had one growing up.
Yeah,
at least with me. But I was thinking.
So you said, guiding principles wise, it was communication, it was fairness, it was community engagement, which for her principally meant through the church, the youth programs, and also, I guess, just friends in the community that she'd have over for casual things.
Mm-hmm. Most of those were also friends from church, because most of the people in our community went to Antioch Baptist. I'd say the church was sort of the social center for the community. for us. The churches.
Broadway, Mamers, pretty small area.
Yeah, I think Broadway might have had a caution light, but Mamers didn't, just had stop signs.
So, on the subject of that, you mentioned the Baptist church, and I think I remember at some point you talking about there being some Presbyterian somewhere in the family. Is that on Eldon's side or Excelle's side?
Well, my dad, I think, was Presbyterian in his youth. Probably a carryover from Scottish ancestry. As I mentioned before, when he was involved in the school that he went to as a youth over towards Charlotte, the man there that kind of took him in his wing.
That guy took him to see that pastor Truett, right?
George W. Truett. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Melissa got us a book. She got Dad a book and let me borrow it, but it's a authorized biography of this George W. Truett guy. And I just read the foreword to it and the introduction the other night. From just those two pieces, he certainly seems like someone that was very highly esteemed, at least in Baptist circles, in that 1920s, 1930s time period. He was from North Carolina, western part of North Carolina. Then he moved to Texas, and was a pastor for 20, 30 years, something like that, at the same church in Texas. But apparently he was also touring. I know that you kind of compared him to like a predecessor to Billy Graham. And I could see that because Billy Graham was also from the western part of North Carolina. So that kind of evangelistic preaching certainly had some deep roots in that part of the state. So anyway, it might be worth reading that biography. I think the biography itself came out in 1939. If anybody else wants to look for it. One of the few pieces of literature that's out there about this guy that influenced Granddad and then ended up becoming Dad's middle name and now my middle name. So back to the topic of grandmother. And you kind of mentioned something here with her faith and community and how important that was to her, and that might tie into my second question a little bit, which was, what did she admire about Eldon?
I think it was several things. He was very smart, very intelligent, well educated. He made when he made decisions, he put a lot of thought into them. He was kind, and he had very strong faith, which was important to her. I think all of those things rolled into it. It's a good question, the one I should have asked her. It would have been interesting
to hear what she had to say.
Yeah, it really would. I remember several times when I'd get aggravated with Dad over something, and she would sometimes go into conversations with me about it with, your dad is a good man, and don't you forget that. And sometimes I think even when she might have disagreed with the decision he made about us, or letting us do something or not do something, or the demands he put on us about work and all, she might not see eye to eye, but she would back him up and respect his decision on things.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's I think speaks to love is respect, and recognizing that this person sacrifices a lot. They're very good. Maybe they have a decision or come up with ideas that I don't agree with all the time, but the positives far outweigh the negatives, and it sounds like she was trying to give you a reminder of that.
She, talking about the driving principles, probably one that I didn't put enough emphasis on is family, her focus on the family. And that was not just raising us as children, but her family, her support for her mother, and her care for her mother as she aged, and the frequency of her visits to her mother. Almost every Sunday while my grandmother was living, she would take us over there to see her and to spend time with her and with my aunts and uncles. It was really interesting. Aunt BB's house was where grandmother lived most of the year, and that was her home base, and everybody went there and gathered around that. And it was so obvious that when grandmother passed and the family stopped getting together like they did, Susan noticed it, my wife. She noticed it, your mother, and said, this is just a shame to have a family that's this strong and has this much love for each other, and to let your grandmother's passing bring about an end to these times of getting together and the extended family getting together. And she kept bringing up to me, your mother's family we need to do something to get them back together. And one year she said, we can do it here at our house, and why don't we just pick a date? And we decided on the 4th of July. We never did anything on the 4th of July, never went anywhere, anything. And she said a lot of them don't either. So we started getting mom's brothers and sisters and the cousins that were close by that lived around, their children.
Did that happen when I was a child?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think I do have very early memories in the late 80s or early 90s of some of those 4th of July gatherings.
Yeah, it probably went on up until you were Jacob's age. Went on until Dad got sick, till he had that episode. We did that, and it was a good time. It was just a good old Southern dinner on the grounds.
Long tables, putting them out on the porches.
Yeah, we put it on that wraparound porch. We had food all the way down one side, and then, chairs around the other side, and people just pulled up a chair wherever they were and ate. And we had a few tables around, but she said we need to at least once a year get everybody back together. And I've got some pictures here. I took pictures every year. I'd set the camera up out there and get everybody on the steps. And we did that even after Dad recovered and came back, was our last one. Susan was inspired by what she saw in that family, and Susan loved it.
Well, it's a big family, and she came from, by comparison, quite a small family. And I can remember her talking about your family and admiring your family as well from the standpoint of, I think, how different it was to her family. Not that her family, there was anything wrong with it, but just the size. When there's more people, it's a different atmosphere than maybe what she was used to, and perhaps she saw the value in that a little more than even you did sometimes, since you were
I think so. I kind of took it for granted. I thought everybody was that way. We'd go over there and you just made the rounds. You hugged everybody in the room or in the house when you came over. When anybody came to your house or you came to theirs or whatever. And especially when they introduced you to somebody, and even when I was a little kid, you went over, you said, hi, they'd say, this is cousin so-and-so. I'd go over and hug them just like I did Grandma when I came in. It was just a way. And when I was dating Susan, she introduced me to grandmother, and my reaction was, I didn't shake her hand, I hug her, and she kind of backed up. She was like, whoa, what's going on? But it wasn't long before when I'd come in the door, she'd reach out to hug me. It started spreading and showing up. But that's something that was really precious to me. It was sort of an age of innocence in a way, because I grew up my world was kind of small. My little neighborhood at Broadway, my mother's family, my dad's family, which was much smaller, no grandparents there. And pretty much everybody that I knew loved me. You know, church was my other place of going, and that was like extended family. And everybody was always glad to see you. You know, for the longest time, it just felt like everybody in the world loved me. And that was a pretty sweet way to grow up, because I saw that in the people I was around. And
now that you bring that up, next week's episode is going to be your life 1950 to 1959. So maybe keep thinking about that throughout the week. Maybe pick out a few vignettes of important moments and just be thinking of those over the next week. But as far as Grandma goes, I want to talk about bring it in a little bit more personal to you. We've talked kind of general about her guiding principles, and we've talked now about what she admired in Eldon. What are some ways that she was important to you specifically, both as a kid and as an adult?
Gosh, there are so many. I talked a little bit in there about her communications. And, you know, I could talk to Dad, but Dad was quick to take the bait and go with it. He wanted, once, if you raised a problem or concern, he was ready to go right into what I ought to do or whatever. Mom would listen. I could talk to her about anything. I mean, I could just, you know, she wasn't judgmental. She never backed away from a question. She was, if I wanted advice or direction, she would give me that. And she wanted to spend time with me. I know I've thought so many times that probably, I don't know if I would have married your mom, and that probably sounds strange if it wasn't for a conversation that we had. She was so pretty, and I got to know her. I got to know her catching a ride home. I don't think, well, maybe sometime we'll talk about this, but I got to be friends with her, talking to her. But the more I got to be friends with her, the more I was afraid that I would ruin it if I asked her out. And I came home one weekend from school, and it was in the fall of the year before the soybeans were to be cut, and there were some cockleburrs out in the field, and on my envelope list from Dad was what he called row the soybeans. You had to walk each row and pull up whatever cockleburrs that were loaded up with the burrs.
Rove, R-O-V-E?
I think that's what he called it.
Rove?
Yeah. And he wanted you to go along, and if you saw a weed, you pulled it up. A cocklebur that had those burrs on it, you pulled it up, because to keep his certification, you couldn't have but a certain percentage of any kind of other seed in there, and it was a very small percentage. And the best way to get it out in his mind was not through the combine, which filtered out some, or the seed cleaner that we ran things through, but by hand carrying, pulling up the weeds and carrying them out and piling them up and burning them. And so that's what I was going to do. And Mom took off with me when I was heading down to the field. And she took a row beside me, and we walked those soybean fields up and down, and pulling up weeds and carrying them. You know, I mentioned early on that she said as a youth, she was a bit of a tomboy, and she would get out, and if cows got out, she'd get out and get a bucket of feed and lure them in. She got right out there with me doing this stuff, and that was just a great time to talk. You know, sort of like we're talking here. She would just any subject, anything that came up, I could ask her, and she would tell me what she knew about it or give me opinion about it or whatever. And I was talking to her about this girl that I had met and I had become friends with and talked to, especially the weekends. She would ride back in the same car. She'd catch a ride with the same person I did. And I remember she listened to everything I was saying. And I had another girl that I dated, not real steady or anything, but she was in school in Tennessee, and I'd see her, when she'd come home or something like that. But we weren't like really hard to be serious in that long a distance. But I was talking to Mom about I don't know what to do. This girl, we've got, a lot in common. We like the same things, but she's just drop dead gorgeous, and I'm scared to death that she would go, "Are you kidding me?" if I tried to ask her out and all. And Mom, coming back with her common sense, said, "Well, son, I'll just tell you, if you don't ever date her, you won't ever know. If you think there's something there, you need to ask her out." And
if you don't ask her out, you'll never know.
Yeah. And, well, it just made stupid good sense, it was just so simple. It was just like, God, why couldn't I see that? And so that's the reason I finally decided to try to get up the courage to ask her out, and eventually did. And thus you're here.
Yeah, well, later on in life, I know that I heard numerous times just you talk about how important she was for different reasons. But, as you got out of the house and had your own kids and you stopped seeing her as frequently, I mean, I know that you made trips as often as you could to get over there to her, but from a distance, when you weren't seeing her as Mom every time you came home from college or while you were in high school or whatever, how did she continue to support you later on in life, even from a distance?
Oh, well, one thing I don't think I mentioned that was really important to me as I grew and went on, and even my education, was that she was my mentor and my only art teacher until I went to college. And she was extremely skilled, and she would sit beside me or watch over my shoulder, and I mentioned before, little tricks she would teach me about.
Like the mirror?
The mirror thing and things like that. So she was important from that standpoint, and I guess probably that was probably the first area that she was really a support to me. Of course, as years went on and I got my education and all, it moved from that. But when we had children, she was a wonderful mentor to Susan and to me. She would come over here when Elizabeth was born. We were still fixing this house up. In fact, while Susan was pregnant, the plumber had not even hooked up the bathroom yet, and she had to go over to her mother's. But Mom would come over here and stay with Susan and paint, paint walls and just do things. She was just always extremely careful not to get in the way. In fact, one of my regrets was that she never would. She was so worried about invading Susan's territory as her daughter-in-law that she would never. She was overly careful about not imposing. And Susan would want her to come more and to spend more time and to stay longer. Sort of the opposite of Everybody Loves Raymond's situation. If anything, I would rather she came more, and Susan would have too. But she was a support with that, with children, with still somebody I could go and talk to, She and I shared our senses of humor. I can't tell you how many nights I'd be watching David Letterman, which came on at 11:30, and something just would crack me up, and I would call her
Mm-hmm.
because I knew she was watching it too. And, she'd answer the phone, "Law, can you believe what that idiot did?" And she'd just be laughing. And sometimes I just need some on time. I might leave home at 9 o'clock at night and ride over to her house. And, nobody knew it but Susan. I'd just ride over there and we'd sit in there and talk and then watch Dave Letterman, and I'd leave and come home at 12:30. And, everybody be asleep, but it was after, it was time after the kids, y'all had gone to bed. And it was just a good time that I could go and spend time with her. She was really, really good she had a genuine interest with all of her grandchildren. And she made little special things for her grandchildren and did things at Christmas. Another thing she did to keep family together, and, I mentioned how important family was to her, was she was a wonderful cook. And she would cook enough every Sunday for all of us married children to come back there with our children and eat lunch.
Well, I actually have a question that touches on that, so don't go into too much detail on it just yet. But before we get into that, just a couple more questions. Similar to how we did with Eldon, and where are some similarities and differences that you see, what are some similarities that you see in yourself, and what influences do you get from her that you hope that you've carried forward in your life?
Wow. One of the things that I observed in her, she was very resilient. She went through my dad's illness. Her faith was so strong. She was like this pillar. In fact, even some of the doctors, young doctor, cardiologist, was drawn to her and would go and sit with her. Every time he got a break, he'd come and find her in that waiting room and sit with her and talk to her. And she, even though everything was going on, she was very pleasant. She had patience, and she would take up time with him. And he told me one day as we were leaving the hospital, he said, "I know that we're not supposed to be jealous. We're not supposed to envy what other people have or covet things." But he said, "I covet your mother and your family and what y'all have." He said that it is so, there's just qualities there that you don't see. And 20 years later, when I went to him as a patient, and he was asking me as he came in the room, "Are you by any chance related to Excelle Sloan?" And I said, "Dr. Light, that was my dad. I'm Ron." And he said, "Oh, wow." He said, next thing out of his mouth, "How is your mom doing?" And he pulled up a chair and sat down and just wanted to talk about her. And then he kind of caught himself and said, "We'll do this." And ironically, Mom developed some heart issues with electrical issues with her heart. Mm-hmm. And he became her cardiologist.
20 years later.
20 years later. And he was just so sweet with her. But one of the things I observed with her was, like my dad, she always had time for people. But there's one thing I saw, she had gout, and they tell me that it's extremely painful. And I had talked to Elaine, and she had told me that Mother had been diagnosed with gout and was in a lot of pain, and so that was one of the evenings I took off to go over there. And when I came in, she was just sitting there in that old blue chair, as you remember, that recliner, and glad to see me. "Hey, boy, come in here. How you doing, Donna?" And as soon as I got kind of settled down in the chair there, I was like, "Mom, what's going on with this gout?" What Elaine was telling me about it. And she said, "Oh, Lawless, that won't do to talk about." She said, how was that Nathan doing? I haven't talked to that boy, and I don't know when. It was when you were in college, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, he's doing great. He's, you know, and I go into telling her what I'd heard and what I knew about things, and she just, you know, got into that. Then I tried to go back to what was going on with her, and she diverted again to somebody else. But she was happy. You know, she was upbeat and positive. And I left that night going home, and I realized, I said, most of us look in mirrors most of the time. We get self-absorbed. You know, what's going on with us, what's affecting us, how it's making us feel, what's going on with our bodies and our lives. But she looked out windows in that she was looking at what's going on in somebody else's life and how they were doing. And that was, I think, her key to happiness. You know, in losing a child under the age of 3, and losing her mother, losing all of her siblings, and losing my dad, that never changed. She always would divert away from the things that caused her pain and the things that affected her directly, and look at other things. And I think one of the things I was most proud of was something that she did after Dad died. There were several ladies in the community that she knew, from some from our church and some that were family friends, that were widowed like she was and had become kind of reclusive. They didn't get out and go anywhere. They stayed in. Some had problems like eyesight issues and difficulty driving and so forth. And one day Mom got up and called 3 of them and said, listen, I'm coming to get you Wednesday morning. Be ready by about 8:30. I'm going to come by and pick you up, and I'm going to pick up Onita, and I'm going to pick up Osley, and we're going to breakfast. And then, you know, she picked one day every week that they were all going to get together and they were going to go. And the people, the you know, the ones that went sometimes varied. If one couldn't go, she'd call somebody else to go. And if one had a doctor's appointment, their children didn't have to take them to the doctor. Mom would take them. Don't know what happened there. Can't hear you.
Now you should be able to hear me.
Now I got you.
The last thing I heard was you were saying she would go pick people up and drive them around, say, come on, let's go, which you mentioned, I think, in last week's episode when we were talking about her electronic whoopee cushion. Yeah. But this is the group that she called the Gadabouts. So yeah. You're going to pick right up then, and we'll carry on. I'll smooth over that if I can in post-production, whatever that connection glitch was that we had.
Yeah, but she came to me. Did I tell you the story about how the Gadabouts formed in one before?
I don't know if you went into the full detail on it. If you did, I can look back and erase this.
I think I just talked about the humor, the trick she did, and the prank she pulled while they were together. But she called me one, and this will give you a little bit about her humor too with me. She called me one day, and you know, in my business I do a lot of logo work, and never expected my mother to ask me to do a logo. She said, I want you to do a logo for me. I said, a logo? And she said, yeah. I said, what for? She said, for my little group. I said, your little group. She said, my friends that we get out. I said, oh, okay. Yeah. I said, have you got a name? And she said, yeah, I've got a name. And I just want you to do a logo for me. And I said, well, what's the name? She said, Gadabouts. And I said, you mean Gadabouts? She said, no, Gadabouts. I was like, Mama, I don't think there's such a word. I think you mean Gadabouts. You know, that made sense. They're getting about, you know. She said, no, it's Gad, G-A-D-A-B-O-U-T.
And the definition that I have found online here is a gadabout is a person who is constantly moving around, looking for the most fun social activity.
Yeah, she said, look it up. So I looked it up, and it gave that definition. It gave also and she said, yeah, well, you look it up and read the definition. And so I looked it up, and there it was, and it said, a social butterfly. And then she said, read the second definition, and it said, one who wanders about aimlessly with no apparent purpose or direction.
Kind of like a gadfly,
Yeah,
GAD.
yeah. Well, I wasn't familiar with gadflies, but I'm sure that's what it came from. But that tells you a little bit about her sense of humor. So I put together a logo that she loved. I did a windshield shape with 4 little curly white heads. One had a steering wheel coming out each side of the head, and silhouetted in that windshield shape with a rearview mirror, and then arched the word gadabouts over the top of it. Mm-hmm. And what she wanted was a plate to put on the front of her car. And so I had a plate printed up to go on the front of her car. And then that Christmas, I had cardigan sweatshirts embroidered with that logo, and gave them to her for Christmas, but they were in her size and the sizes for these ladies, so she could give them each a sweatshirt. And one of my favorite memories is when I had an office over on Railroad Street. I saw this blue Park Avenue that was my dad's from real estate. I saw it pull in to the parking space, pointed towards my building, and then back up into the parking lot, back up into a parking space. And I saw that plate on the front of it. And these 4 little women get out of that car wearing those cardigan sweaters and coming up to my office. And they all came in, gave me big hugs and said, we're going to go to lunch together. And I wanted to take a picture of them with the car out in front of my office there. And Mother had set up an appointment to get her oil changed while we were at lunch. And she said, well, we've got to go. I've got my appointment is in 30 minutes. She said, we'll do that when we come back. And we went to lunch, and the place we went was like a cafeteria or buffet. And I couldn't believe there was a lot of people their age there. And about 3 different people that were in that restaurant came over and wanted to know about who they were, who the group was, because they saw the sweaters. It became a ministry. I had one of those ladies' daughter told me, your mom saved my mom's life. She just had lost her purpose and lost her joy, and your mom made life fun again and gave her something to look forward to every day. And
that's really sweet.
Yeah,
and that really does kind of tie a bow there on your story of how she would look out at other people instead of looking in at herself. And there's good clinical research out there, I'm sure, to say that the more self-focused you are, typically the more it magnifies your problems. But if you can be focused on others, it has this nice little side benefit,
Yeah, that's true. And backing that up,
we are almost out of time.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'll tell you this one little thing that I asked her one day. Mom, why did you do that? I knew you were hurting. And she said, well, son, I had a choice to make. I could sit in this house by myself and feel sorry for myself and all that had happened and all I was going through, or I could get out of this house and do something about it and try to make a difference for some other people who hadn't done something about it, that were still inside and still isolating themselves. And she said, So it was just simply a choice I had to make, and that's what I chose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like you said, that the mirror and the window, that's a choice. You know, whether you look at your plight or you look at other
Someone
people's
else's
plights.
and see how can I help them? Is there something I can do to help
Yeah.
someone else?
But
Well, if
that's-
I were to say some things that maybe I see similarities in the two of you with that you've mentioned just in this episode, a couple of them would be that positivity and wanting to look for the good in a situation, maybe sometimes to your own detriment, but you want to heavily weigh the potential for a positive outcome when so many people, it seems, are on the other side and they want to assume the worst and take the more negative slant on something. It's always been refreshing to me that you seem to be a more positive, optimistic type. That's your knee jerk is to look for the possibilities and where things are good and where we can find solutions. And I hear a lot of that being echoed in what you're saying about Grandma and that she doesn't want to gossip and she doesn't want to talk negatively about other people, and she doesn't feel like focusing on her problems. Instead, she wants to look at solutions and talk about other people and things that it won't do to talk about things that are bad, because that's just there's no good that's going to come of that. So I'm making a choice to change the conversation to something that's positive. And again, there's probably good clinical research there that cognitive behavioral therapy at work there, where you are in control of your thoughts. You can choose what to look at, and you're not a passenger on a train that's forced to ride along the thought pattern that your brain is set in. You can set a new course and be positive and be optimistic.
That's a great way to,
we
great observation.
I apologize, I'm still getting over a cold. Another thing that is also echoed that I'd see in you is that community. You've been very involved in your church. Everybody in town knows you in Four Oaks, and that's pretty much always been the case, and seems like either that was modeled really well for you from maybe both your parents, or it's just ingrained in you to be something that you want to be a part of the community and know people and have time for people and listen to them and get to know them. And that's something that I think has been very beneficial to your happiness. Is there something making a squeaking noise in there?
That was me. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Very, very last question. This week we won't do any entertainment recommendations or current events or anything like that. Hopefully we'll get back on a schedule where that's allowed. There's enough time to allow for that, but parents, you got a lot to say about them. So what are you going to do? So last question. You mentioned earlier she's a good cook. Real quick, what would your ideal plate of Excelle Sloan food look like if you could have a big plate of it right now?
Oh gosh, it would definitely be fried chicken.
Mm-hmm.
She cooked the best fried chicken ever. I've been afraid to try it myself because I was afraid I'd be disappointed. I know how she did it. Maybe one day I will. But it would be that. It would be corn pudding. It would be her little cornbread pancakes. She poured out cornmeal into a griddle and let them flow out like pancakes. Cooked them real crispy. It would have her fried okra. Gracious, her homemade biscuits.
I was going to say, I remember the biscuits.
Got to have those in there. My goodness. My college roommate still talks about coming home with me on the weekends and holidays. He lived in Florida, and he'd get home all the time, like Thanksgiving and stuff sometimes. And he still, to this day, talks about the food. and eating with my mother. But to give you an idea how good her chicken was, she asked Susan one October. She said, "Susan, you've got a birthday coming up, and I want to get you something that would really be special to you. I want you to tell me some things that you would really enjoy. That's something that, some things that I can pick from that you would really like to have." And Susan said, "Well, you'll think I'm crazy." And she said, "No, I won't. I'm not going to judge you over what you want." She said, "If I could have anything I wanted, it would be to have you fry me a chicken and let me eat all I wanted." Because it took so long to fry chicken the way she did. She pan fried it, one side then the other, that she couldn't cook enough for everybody to have 2 or 3 pieces when when we were all there.
Right.
But that'll give you some idea. But that's what it would look like probably. And maybe field peas. That was the other thing. I loved the way she cooked field peas, and I would put those on top of the cornbread like a tostada.
Oh, we're getting strategy now.
Get that juice drip into the cornbread. And she had this thing she would make with fresh tomatoes and pour pickle juice over them. Slice them and pour pickle juice.
Well, we'll be here all day if we think of all of the excellent things that she made. But
there you go, right
one
with
thing's
her
for
name.
sure.
Excellent.
That's right. But she's a very dear woman. We miss her and love her, and it's just been really fun to get to have a conversation here, 2 conversations, where we talk about some of those fun memories, and appreciate you taking the time to share it with us. We will be back next week, where we will be looking at the decade of the 1950s. And until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.